the king Seqenenretau, who ruled in Upper Egypt, attempts to uh, expel the Hyksos from his country. And from what you see in this picture, it didn't go well. This is the mummy of Seqenenretau, and if you look at his head, he was brutally killed in battle. And that huge hole that you see, that's an axe right there going through. And of course, there's not only one. You can see that he's hacked on several places. He is going to be succeeded by Kamose, his son. And Kamose is pretty successful. He advances north with a large army. He lays siege to the city of Avaris, which was the capital of the Hyksos. But then we don't know much about him, so we assume that he also got killed in the process. So it will be up to Ahmose the first. Ahmose is the brother of Kamose. He ascends to the throne after his father and his brother are killed, and he will make sure that this time his campaign against the Hyksos is successful. And here in this amazing painting, we see how Ahmose riding a chariot. You see how the Egyptians have adopted the chariot and shooting what? A composite bow. He's defeating the Hyksos chariots. They are being pushed away, and some of them are crossing a river and drowning. And of course, the king appears as this victorious ruler, literally greater than all his enemies. It is around this time that the ruler of Egypt comes to be known as Pharaoh. The term Pharaoh means house. So when you refer to the king as Pharaoh, you're saying that he is the house, the dynasty of Egypt. And with the expulsion of the Hyksos, we have the beginning of the new kingdom. And the new kingdom is the imperial stage of Egyptian history, meaning that with the new kingdom, you start to see the Egyptians conquering foreign lands and expanding their borders, controlling and having political influence over a vast territory outside their borders. A very successful ruler during this period is Thutmose I. He solidifies the power of Egypt. He builds up the army. He makes alliances with neighbors. And he leaves behind a very stable kingdom. Thutmose I is succeeded by Thutmose II. And Thutmose II has a son. The son of Thutmose II will eventually become Thutmose III. But here is where the problems begin. Thutmose II dies. We don't know the causes of his death. But when he dies, Thutmose III is only 5 years old. And that means that he has to be groomed and he has to be protected by someone. And someone has to take the reins of government until he becomes of age. And that would be what? Probably the age of 13 or 15. The person who assumes the role of regent. A regent is someone who runs a country while the king is a minor. The person selected to do this is Hatshepsut, a woman, the wife of Thutmose II, but also the daughter of Thutmose III. So what does that mean? That Hatshepsut is the half-sister of Thutmose II. Now, this seems very surprising to us in modern times, but in ancient Egypt, it was customary for brothers and sisters from the royal family to marry, and only within the royal family. Why? Because remember, according to the royal doctrine, the king is a living god, and he's going to marry and procreate another god. Who can he marry? A living goddess. And where are you going to find a living goddess? Well, within the family. And that's why incest was practiced as part of the structure of succession by the rulers of Egypt since the time of the Old Kingdom. So in the case of Hatshepsut, Hatshepsut is the half sister of Thutmose II, but she is not the mother of Thutmose III. Thutmose III's mother is someone else. But as someone who has royal blood, she will be the regent. What is interesting, however, is that if you look at the dates when she ruled, 1479 to 1458 BC, that's 20 years. So if Thutmose III was 5 years old when his father died, how come Hatshepsut ruled for 20 years? And the answer is that she took over the throne. In this image, you see two statues of Hatshepsut portrayed not as a queen, but as a king, as a pharaoh. That's her. She is wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. And what else? She has the symbols of power in her hands, and she has a beard. A beard, especially that type of beard, which often it was not a real beard but an attachment, was one of the symbols of royal power. Only the king could wear that. And she is portraying herself as a male, wearing the crowns and wearing the royal beard. What does that mean? That Hatshepsut is not just holding the place for Thutmose III. She has become queen. And the big question is, how was this possible? Women in the upper classes in Egypt were very powerful, but very often they were powerful through their children, through their sons or through their husbands. In the case of Hatshepsut, she becomes regent. Thutmose III is only 5 years old, and she starts to rule, and she becomes quite successful. Of course, as she rules the country, she appoints people to important positions. So by the time that Thutmose III is 13, which is when technically he would become a man, according to the tradition of those days, Hatshepsut realizes that maybe she has to step down, but obviously she doesn't want to step down. And the people around her realize that if she steps down and the kid comes to power, then their position may be in danger. So it is in her interest, but also in the interest of everyone who had some power in Egypt, for her to remain queen. But being a queen is not enough. She has to become king. And that means that she has to assume a male persona when she is portrayed in these monuments. Thutmose is given a military training, but he has to wait in the wings, and he understands that. There's no evidence that he tried to claim his rightful position while she was alive. As a woman, Hatshepsut is in the difficult position because kings were expected to lead in war. And obviously she doesn't have that type of training. She has a big army. But what do you do with this army? If you send that army into battle and the army is defeated, that's the end of her reign. If she sends Thutmose, the young Thutmose, in command of an army, another country, and he wins, then she's done. She has to step down. So what do you do with this army? And she does something that is very unique, very creative, and quite clever. She sends an expedition to the land of Punt. And we don't know where Punt is. We assume that Punt is somewhere around Ethiopia or Somalia today. So he sends a large expedition, and this expedition is kind of a diplomatic expedition. It is a trade expedition. It is perhaps a sort of military expedition also, but it's not an invasion. And we know that these people, her people go there, and they come back. And what do they bring back? Well, they bring gold, they bring incense, they bring ostrich feathers, They bring ivory from the tusks of elephants. They bring exotic animals, giraffes, cheetahs, and along with that, an incredible knowledge about this land that to the Egyptians appear exotic. For example, there's this account where they talk about the Queen of Punt. Apparently, they were also ruled by a female, and the account mentions that she's immensely big, that she's very heavy. Um, this is not only a commercial expedition, but it's almost like an ethnographic study because when you look at the representations of the expedition, there are portrayals of the kind of people who live in that land, a portrayal of the kind of houses that they use. So the Egyptians are truly interested in this land. Of course, this expedition also brings financial rewards, and it is a good way to utilize the army without having to go to war. Hatshepsut also knows that as a ruler, she needs to portray her greatness through buildings. So she commissions the construction of uh, this building, which is both a temple and her tomb. This is the mortuary monument, the mortuary complex at Deir el Bahri in Egypt. And it is one of the most amazing buildings in the history of architecture. It's a beautiful building, very innovative, very original. The what the perfection of this building and the setting against this huge rock is one of the most spectacular pieces of architecture ever produced. And it's a testament to her power, it's a testament to her taste. And she would be buried there. And close to that temple, there is actually the tomb of one of her advisors, who was also the architect of this amazing building. So after some 20 years of rule, she dies, most likely of natural causes. And it is only then that Thutmose III comes to power. Thutmose III is then, about 25 years old when he becomes king. And as soon as he becomes king, he's going to engage in the destruction of the memory of Hatshepsut. See this head right there? This head was defaced by people, by officials whose task was to destroy every monument, every inscription, every reference to Hatshepsut. So you can imagine this official, this appointed official, going from town to town, from monument to monument, from temple to temple, with a whole crew with chisels, literally chiseling out the name of Hatshepsut, erasing paintings that have her effigy, erasing any reference that may attest to her existence. And not only because her success diminishes the image of Thutmose III, but because her success also is a challenge to the concept of Ma'at. Remember, Ma'at is the harmony of things, the harmony of the universe, the balance of the universe. And when she broke the rules, when she, as a woman, assumed the title of king and assumed the persona of a man, she was challenging that order. She was challenging Ma'at. So Thutmose doesn't want anyone to remember that. And for that reason, she is erased from history. Obviously, like most bureaucrats, these guys did not do a thorough job. So there were things that remain, and it's good that they were not that good at their task, because otherwise we would not know about the accomplishments of this incredible woman. There will be another event during the New Kingdom that will once again challenge this concept of Ma'at. But 100 years after Hatshepsut, the ruler of Egypt is a man by the name of Amenhotep IV. And if you look at his name, Amenhotep has in it included the word Amen, which refers to Amen Ra, the creators of the universe, the creator of the universe, and the most powerful god in the Egyptian pantheon. But at one point during his reign, he will change his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaton. And that change of name is quite significant. Amenhotep was married to a woman named Nefertiti, and this is what we think a very accurate portrayal of who she was. It's an amazing piece of art, right? This is an amazing sculpture that captures not only the physical beauty of this queen, but also something deep about her personality. Akhenaten and Nefertiti form a very strong partnership, and they both were part of this cult of the god Aton. The Egyptians were polytheists, meaning that they believed in many gods. Of course, there were different rankings, and Amen, for example, was very important, and Osiris and Horus, and then there were minor gods. Aten was the physical disk of the sun. And there are some historians who believe that the god Aten is not necessarily an Egyptian god. It may have come from contacts with other cultures. And that was quite common in those days. If you believe in 20 gods, why not believe in 21 or 22, right? So the Egyptians, who are now in touch with other peoples from Nubia and Libya and Syria and Mesopotamia, probably adopted into their pantheon, into their list of gods, new gods. Whatever the case is, Amenhotep and Nefertiti start to worship Aten. And there's nothing wrong with that until they begin to worship Aten exclusively. In this portrayal, you can see Amenhotep worshiping the sun with Nefertiti in the back and their daughters behind them. There are many images like this. And what has happened at this point is that not only is Akhenaten changes his name, right, from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, and what is happening is that he's shifting allegiances from Amen-Ra to Aten, but he takes that even a step further, and he claims that Aten is not only the main god of Egypt now, but the only god of Egypt. This may be the first instance of monotheism in history, that is, the belief in a single god. Now, there's something interesting about this portrayal, because if you look at the image of Akhenaten, look at his body. He has wide hips and very, very thick thighs, and it looks almost like a female body, and he is represented like that in almost every sculpture or carving of him. And there is the speculation that this may have been some kind of genetic condition. Where does that genetic condition come from? Well, probably from inbreeding. Remember, these people were marrying their sisters and their cousins, and sometimes we know that mothers and sons also produce offspring. So some historians speculate that this may not be just an artistic representation of Akhenaten, but he probably had some physical issue connected to a genetic problem. Whatever it was, this is revolutionary. The notion that a king who is a living god decides to push aside all the other gods and replace them with the cult of Aten. Akhenaten goes as far as to build a new city in the middle of the desert. This doesn't make sense. Why do you want to build this huge city far away from everything? Actually, there is evidence, archaeologists have found, of a lot of children dying in this place, most likely because they were used as labor in the construction of this city. Akhetaten, the name of the city, is far away from everything. Well, I would say far away from that. It's out of the way. You don't build a city in the middle of the desert. But probably what Akhenaten, the king, was trying to do was to get away from history, get away from tradition. Some historians believe that by shifting the worship of Amen-Ra to Aten, what Akhenaten was doing was to take away the power of the priests of Amun-Ra. The priestly class in Egypt was extremely, extremely powerful, and the priests of Amun-Ra were extremely wealthy. So Akhenaten may have believed in Aten, but he may have used that belief also to force these powerful priests to either adhere to his new beliefs or lose their wealth and social standing, and therefore also their political power. And by building this new capital far away from everything else, he's saying this is a new beginning. It's a new era. Unfortunately, by devoting so much time to this new religion, it seems that Akhenaten neglected some of his other duties as king. There's evidence that Egypt is being attacked by its enemies. In this place, Akhetaten, the modern name is El Amarna, archaeologists found many tablets written in cuneiform. These tablets are actually the correspondence between Akhenaten and his governors and some foreign rulers. And they were written in cuneiform because the foreigners could not understand the hieroglyphic system. But these letters are quite revealing. And for example, there's one from a governor that lives near what today it's probably in the area of Jerusalem today. And this official writes to the king, "My lord, please do not forget about us. We need you. The Hapiru are attacking, and we need you to send archers that we can protect ourselves." It is almost like an SOS. It is almost as if the administrators of the other parts of the empire don't know what's going on. Why is the king far away in that place in the middle of the desert? We have real problems here, and he's not paying attention to them. That is the sense that you get from some of these letters. And then he dies. And we don't know the causes of his death. Very likely they were natural causes. And it seems that Akhenaten was not in the best of health, and probably something having to do with his with a genetic condition. But he dies. And the moment he dies, his city is abandoned. Everyone just pack their belongings, and they go back to the city of Thebes. Thebes was the traditional capital of Egypt. The throne is now in the hands of a young boy, Tutankhamen, and Tutankhamen will become very, very, very famous, not because he was such an important ruler, but because his tomb is the only royal tomb that has been found completely intact. Over the course of thousands of years, the tombs of Egyptian kings have been the target of tomb robbers. Every single tomb has been pillaged, from the pyramids to the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Tomb robber was a profession in Egypt historically. There are so many archaeological treasures that people dedicated themselves, and still, unfortunately, dedicate themselves to stealing these things. So in 1922, an archaeologist by the name of Carter found the tomb of Tutankhamen. And when he entered the tomb, he realized that tomb robbers had been there before. Who knows when? Could have been the day before. It could have been 500 years ago. But it was obvious that the tomb had been pillaged. But as they looked around, they discovered that there was the sound of hollowness. Something was hollow behind one wall. So they punched a hole into the wall. They threw in a lamp. And when Carter looked inside, someone asked, "What do you see? What do you see?" And he said, "Wonderful things." What he had found was the actual tomb of King Tutankhamen. And what happened is that the Egyptians, knowing that tomb robbers were a danger to the preservation of the king and his treasures, what they did is that they created a decoy tomb. So sometime in the past, tomb robbers came in, they found some objects there, they stole them, and they figured, this is it, and they went away. And then when other tomb robbers came in and they looked at it was empty, they said, "Oh, why bother?" And they left. And then 1922, when Carter comes in, he figures out that the real tomb is actually hidden. And what he found is an amazing collection. It is the only tomb, as I said before, that has the full collection of goods that were put with the king. But what is interesting about this tomb is that the treasures are exquisite. Look at this. This is a mask made of gold. It has been studied by archaeologists and technicians, and it is believed that it was made probably in 70 days, because after he died, they had to prepare the body, and they had to put all of these things together. And he died when he was 19 years old. So that's problematic, right? Because they were not expecting his death. So all of this had to be arranged very fast. And the way that Carter found the tomb, it's almost as if they said, you know what, let's bury him with everything, and they just piled up all of these treasures. There was no effort to place them in a neat, symbolic manner. No, everything was just crammed together. And that actually gives us an indication of the critical times that that the Egyptians were experiencing at the time. It seems that since Tutankhamun was a boy, after the death of Akhenaten, the priests of the old religion took control over him. And look at his name. His original name was Tutankhaten, but he's known as Tutankhamen, meaning that he returned to the old cult of Amen-Ra and all the gods of Egypt. We also know that he had a lot of health problems. He may have had a malformed foot, so he needed walking canes, and they have found hundreds of beautiful walking canes. The problem is that, and actually they have done analysis of his DNA, that when you look at his family tree, he is the product of incest, not only in one generation, but on several generations. And what happens with incest is that when two siblings procreate, whatever genetic condition exists in them is going to be transmitted and is going to become worse every generation if the incest continues. So, for example, Tutankhamun was married to Ankhesenamun, and there are some beautiful, lovely pictures of the two together. Well, they were brother and sister, and their parents were brother and sister. So you have several generations of incest, and of course, poor Tutankhamun is born with all kinds of health issues. And still not clear what the cause of death was. Some say that was malaria. There may have been an indication that he died in maybe in a battle. But one of the theories says that he may have been riding a chariot, because some of the injuries that his body shows are consistent with that. We don't really know. But whatever happened to Tutankhamun, the biggest problem is that in his tomb, they also found these two tiny mummies of two little girls that were born dead. Apparently, linked to these genetic problems was the members of the family would have a hard time procreating, and very often the women of the family would have miscarriages. So it's a very moving thing to see the two little bundles of the sarcophagi of the two little girls. He is unable to leave behind an heir. And that means that after the death of Tutankhamun, the person who takes charge is a priest by the name of Ai. Ai actually forces Ankhesenamun to marry him, and he basically restores Egypt to the old religion. Ai is succeeded by Horemheb, who was actually a general. Ai didn't have any children, so Horemheb, a general, assumes control and eventually establishes a new dynasty. Under this new dynasty, which includes people like Ramses II, the Kingdom of Egypt will become a very successful empire. Ramses II is perhaps the peak of Egyptian power. He extends the borders of the empire. He brings a period of prosperity. He actually is going to have a very, very long reign. He will live probably close to 100, which is amazing, right? Especially in those days. We know that he had like 90 something sons and probably the same number of daughters. And this is not just legend. In some cases, a king says, "Oh, I had all of these children." Well, there is proof that he actually had all of these children. Obviously, not with the same woman. But everything about Ramses is larger than life, including this temple that you see right here. Ramses II, it's a great conqueror. He's a great builder, and he glorified his accomplishments in these buildings that have become some of the greatest works of architecture in history. Eventually, Ramses is going to go to war against the Hittites. The famous Battle of Kadesh will take place probably around 1277 BC or so. It's an inconclusive battle that later leads to a peace treaty between the two, and that brings a lot of stability to the Middle East, a period of prosperity. So the rest of his reign, Ramses II will dedicate to have kids and to build amazing buildings. Like this one. This is the temple of Abu Simbel, and it is a testament to the incredible power and the incredible ego of the king. All of those 4 statues are representations of the king. And this right here is Ramses. His mummy was found, and it's relatively well preserved. Ramses II will be succeeded by Merneptah, one of his sons. And Merneptah is the person that we mentioned before in reference to the name Israel. The Merneptah stele right here is this inscription where Israel is mentioned for the first time. But more important, Merneptah is the first Egyptian king who will have to confront the Sea Peoples. I have mentioned the Sea Peoples before. The Sea Peoples are a group of marauders, or you can call them pirates if you wish. These are basically clans or tribes, if you wish, that probably originate on some of the islands of the Mediterranean, maybe Corsica, Sardinia, Sicily, maybe the islands of the Aegean Sea, maybe the coast of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. What they have in common is that they are attracted to the wealth of Egypt and to the wealth of the Hittite Empire. They don't want to conquer. That doesn't seem to be their aim, and they don't seem to have the numbers for that. They are not one people. That's why the Egyptians call them sea peoples in the plural. And they call them sea peoples because that's all they know about them, that they come from the sea. We know some of their names, the Luca, the Shakalash, the Chardin or Chardin, the Peleshet. These are groups that are attracted to the wealth of Egypt. And basically what they do is that they attack commerce. They land on Egyptian villages and towns, and their aim is pillaging. A lot of the time, they are defeated. We know that some of them are eventually hired by the Egyptians to fight for them in some of their campaigns. So what you see right here is an illustration of the Sea Peoples arriving on these boats by sea, and the Egyptians protecting, the Pharaoh protecting his country from them. But there are other illustrations where the Sea Peoples appear as part of the troops of an Egyptian Pharaoh fighting other enemies in the Middle East. The problem with the Sea Peoples is that they don't have a unified command. They're not even one people. It's several of them. And since the Egyptians don't know where they come from, all they can do is wait for them to attack and defend themselves. And this will take a toll, not only on the Egyptians, but it will take a toll on the Hittite Empire. The depredations of the Sea Peoples are going to have a profound impact. They're going to give rise to something called the crisis of the first millennium. Between 1200 and 1000 BC, there's going to be an era of convulsion throughout the Eastern Mediterranean that is going to affect all the great empires. It will affect the Egyptian Empire, it will affect the Hittite Empire, and it will affect Babylon. After these sea peoples enter the scene, the Egyptians will retreat from their imperial conquest in the Middle East, and basically bringing an end to the new kingdom. And even after the sea peoples disappear from the scene, they will open the floodgates for other groups to come in. These groups eventually will conquer sections of Anatolia, and they will bring down the Hittite Empire, and they will rearrange the political map of the Middle East. Egypt, however, will survive, and throughout the rest of their history, they will have a Nubian dynasty, a Libyan dynasty. They will be conquered by the Assyrians, then by the Babylonians, by the Persians, and finally by Alexander the Great, who will establish, one of his generals will establish a Macedonian dynasty there. And by the year 30, Egypt will be conquered by the Romans and will be integrated into the Roman Empire. By this time, Egypt was already 4,000 years old. And eventually, Egypt will be transformed once again. Christianity will be established, and many of the traditions and a lot of the knowledge of old Egypt will disappear. For example, the use of hieroglyphs will become a mystery until Champollion will rediscover that. And by the 7th century, Egypt will be conquered by the Muslims coming out of the Arabian Peninsula, and this will be the final blow to the ancient Egyptian civilization, because the Egyptian language will be replaced by Arabic. And by the year 1000 AD, both Egyptians and visitors would look marveled at the pyramids and the monuments left behind, and they would wonder, who built that? Who were these people? And the information that we have today was possible only because of the rediscovery of the Egyptians through other sources, because of some of the writings of the Greeks and the Romans, and of course, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and the decipherment of their language. And today, we're still learning a lot of things about them, and it is one of the most fascinating civilizations in the history of humanity.